All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into the Wizard Liz's video, Realizing These Things Will Change Your Life. Have you seen this one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think she makes some really good points.
Yeah, I really related to a lot of the things she was talking about. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was how she talks about self-sabotage, like all the sneaky ways that we hold ourselves back without even realizing it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, there's a whole field of study around this in psychology. Like, all these defense mechanisms and cognitive biases, they can kind of lead to those self-defeating behaviors that she's describing.
Yeah, and she gives some good examples, too. Like, she talks about refusing help when we need it or pushing people away.
Right before they can hurt us.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times that comes from, like a fear of vulnerability or maybe just a deep-seated belief that we're not good enough or we're not worthy of that support. So it's like we're almost subconsciously trying to protect ourselves from, being hurt or rejected. But then in doing that, we actually end up kind of limiting our own growth and potential.
Yeah, it's like we're building walls instead of bridges.
Right.
And she even talks about her own experience, like how she used to attract people who would mistreat her because deep down she didn't believe she deserved any better.
Absolutely. And that speaks to the importance of, really addressing those underlying beliefs that we have about ourselves.
Yeah.
Because if we don't believe that we're worthy of love or respect or success, then we're going to continue to sabotage ourselves. It becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy.
It really does. But, what I really appreciate about her message is that she doesn't just leave us with that realization. Like, she goes on to talk about how recognizing those patterns was actually a turning point for her.
Right. It's like step one is awareness.
Yeah.
But step two is actually doing something about it.
Yeah. And for her, it was about, setting boundaries, starting to demand respect, and just attracting healthier relationships into her life.
It's about aligning our actions with our desired outcomes.
Absolutely.
Like we can't just, wish for a better life. We have to actively create it.
I love that. So I'm curious for you, like when you think about your own life, are there any areas where you might be holding yourself back? Are there any recurring patterns or behaviors that you've noticed that maybe are sabotaging your own progress?
I think for me, one of the things that I've struggled with in the past is perfectionism. It's like this fear of not being good enough, and it can be really paralyzing.
Oh, I can totally relate to that. It's like setting these impossible standards for ourselves, and then we end up feeling overwhelmed, or we procrastinate, or we just, we don't even start.
Right, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because we're so afraid of not being perfect that we end up not doing anything at all. So one thing that I've found to be helpful is to really just focus on progress over perfection.
Yeah.
It's about celebrating those small wins and acknowledging that, growth is a journey. It's not a destination.
Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah. And it actually ties in really well with one of the other points that the Wizard Liz makes in her video about challenging inherited beliefs. She has this great line where she says, "What you have been taught is not a fact. What you have been taught your whole life is just what your parents have been taught by their parents, but it's not bad or wrong for you to choose a different direction."
Yeah, and I think that's so important because it's so easy to just accept the beliefs and the values that we've inherited from our families or from society without ever really questioning whether they actually resonate with us.
It's like we're wearing hand-me-down clothes that don't even fit us anymore.
Exactly. Like times change, we need to evolve with them.
Yeah.
It's about having the courage to actually examine those inherited beliefs, to kind of sift through them and choose the ones that actually align with who we are and what we want.
And it can be tough, right? Especially if you come from a family where, those beliefs are really deeply ingrained.
It can be.
But, she even shares her own experience with this, talking about how her relationship with her mother actually improved once she started embracing her own path. And I think that's such a powerful message, too. Like, it shows that you can still have healthy relationships with your family, even if you don't necessarily agree on everything.
Absolutely. I think it's about, communication and mutual respect. It's not about trying to change each other's minds. It's about honoring each other's journeys.
Yeah. So have you ever had to challenge any inherited beliefs in your own life?
Oh, definitely. I grew up in a very traditional household where, there was a lot of emphasis on stability and security. So the expectation was that I would go to college, I would get a good job, and I would follow this, predictable path. But I always had this entrepreneurial spirit, this desire to kind of create something of my own. But it took a lot of courage to actually break away from those expectations and forge my own path. especially because my family didn't really understand or support it at first.
Yeah.
But, eventually they came around. And I think that's what's so beautiful about it. Like, even if there's initial resistance,
Yeah.
when you're true to yourself, people will eventually see that and respect that.
Right. And it leads us to another really powerful concept that the Wizardliz talks about, which is this idea of creating your own reality. And this really resonated with me. She says, when I realized that I could actually change things about my life and I could control what happens, I was shocked because my whole life I was told, no, it's this way and you will follow this way.
It's like that moment when you realize you're not just a passenger in your own life.
Yeah.
You're actually the driver.
You have agency, right? Like
Yeah.
you have choices.
You have choices.
Yeah.
And she's such a perfect example of this because she went from feeling like a victim of her circumstances to becoming this incredibly successful creator.
Mm-hmm.
And it just proves that we really do have the power to create positive change in our lives, but it starts with that self-belief.
And it's not just about positive thinking, right? It's about aligning our actions with our desired outcomes.
Totally.
Like we have to actually make those choices, we have to set those goals, and we have to take those concrete steps toward the life that we want.
Have you ever had one of those moments where you realized, wait a minute, I actually have the power to change things?
I think for me it was when I finally made the decision to quit my corporate job and pursue my passion for writing full time.
Mhm.
Because it was terrifying. I was leaving this stable career behind, but it was also incredibly liberating. Because it was like I was finally stepping into my power and taking control of my own destiny. That's awesome. And it's scary,
It is.
but it's so worth it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
the fear was temporary, but the freedom and the fulfillment that I've experienced since then has been so worth it.
Yeah, I think we all have those moments where we just need to take that leap of faith, even if it's scary, even if we don't know exactly what's on the other side, but that's where the growth happens.
Absolutely. It's like
Because
you can't discover new land unless you're willing to lose sight of the shore, right?
Love that. And speaking of taking leaps of faith, let's talk about self-control and discipline, because this is another area that the Wizardliz is super open about in her video. She talks about her own struggles with things like aggression, binge eating, and negativity.
Yeah, and I think this is where a lot of self-improvement advice kind of falls short. Because people are told, just be positive or just manifest your dreams. But true change requires a level of discipline that, frankly, a lot of people aren't willing to embrace.
Right. Like it's the not so sexy part of personal growth.
To the nitty-gritty.
It is. But she doesn't sugarcoat it. And I think that's what I appreciate about her. She's like, this is hard work. This is a constant battle.
And it's ongoing.
Yeah. And it's not about being perfect. It's about making those conscious choices day after day.
It's about building those positive habits.
Yeah.
And making them non-negotiable.
Yeah. She has this amazing quote where she says, I control my body. I am not going to eat all this food because I control what I put in my body. I am not going to listen to things negatively because I have control over my mind. I mean, how empowering is that?
It's a declaration.
It-
It's powerful.
It's like she's taking ownership of her power.
Exactly. And I think it's a reminder that self-control is a muscle that needs to be exercised regularly, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more we practice it, the stronger we become.
Yeah. So what are some areas in your life where you feel like you could strengthen your self-control?
I think for me, it's about being more mindful of my time.
Oh.
Because I have a tendency to get sucked into social media or get sidetracked by less important tasks. So it's like I need to train my brain to focus on what truly matters.
Yeah. Like you have to be intentional.
You do.
About how you spend your time.
Because time is our most valuable resource, right?
It is. And this leads perfectly into the Wizardliz's next point about surrounding yourself with winners. And she clarifies that she doesn't just mean financially successful people.
Right. She's
Yeah.
talking about people who have that positive, supportive, growth-oriented mindset. The kind of people who inspire you to be your best self.
Yes. Who lift you up
Yeah.
and celebrate your wins with you.
It's so important to curate our social circles, both online and offline,
Absolutely.
to make sure that we're surrounding ourselves with people who, lift us up rather than drag us down.
Yeah. And she actually shares a personal story about this too, like how she used to attract people who always needed rescuing.
Right.
And, she's a very giving person. But she realized that constantly being the rescuer was draining her energy, and it was actually preventing her from pursuing her own growth.
It's a common pattern, especially for people who are naturally empathetic and compassionate. But, as Wizardliz discovered, it's so important to have boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries are key. It's like the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Absolutely. And it's not selfish to prioritize our own well-being. It's essential.
It is. So have you ever had to make any changes in your relationships to create that kind of supportive and inspiring environment for yourself?
It's an ongoing process, but I've definitely had to make some tough choices over the years, and I've learned to distance myself from people who are just constantly negative or who drain my energy. And it's not easy, but it's been so worth it for my own mental and emotional well-being.
That makes sense. And it's not about being mean or cutting people off. It's about protecting your own energy.
It's about setting those boundaries and creating a space where you can thrive.
Yeah. And that leads us to another really important topic that Thewizardliz addresses, which is facing and healing trauma. She says, you are not your trauma.
Such a powerful statement.
It is, right, because trauma can have such a lasting impact on our lives.
It does, in ways that we may not even be aware of.
Yeah, it can shape our beliefs, our behaviors, our relationships, everything.
And she speaks from experience, sharing her own journey of healing from abuse. And what I find so inspiring is that she doesn't shy away from the rawness of it all.
No, she's very open and honest.
She is.
And it's like she's giving others permission to do the same.
Yes. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that pain, but also to recognize that healing is possible. It's a process, and it takes courage to face those wounds.
It does, and it often requires professional support.
Absolutely.
She talks about the importance of therapy, and I think that's something we should all be talking about more openly.
I agree. There's still so much stigma surrounding mental health, but it's okay to ask for help. It's actually a sign of strength.
It is. So for anyone listening who's carrying the weight of past trauma, know that you're not alone and that healing is possible. It might not be easy, but the freedom and the growth you can experience on the other side are so worth it.
And the transformation can be incredible.
It can. And that brings us to a really interesting point that Thewizardliz makes about her preference for discipline over motivation. She actually says that motivation means nothing to her. She believes discipline is what truly drives success.
Love that. Because motivation can be so fleeting.
It is. It comes and goes.
It depends on our mood, what we had for breakfast, external factors.
The discipline.
Discipline is that consistent effort that leads to long-term achievement.
And she really walks the walk with this. She gives specific examples, like she talks about going to the gym, doing yoga, reading books. Even when she doesn't feel like it, she just commits to doing those things regardless of her mood.
Because she just shows up.
She does.
And that's what it takes.
It is. So what about you? What are some areas in your life where you found that discipline has been more effective than waiting for motivation?
I would say my writing routine is a great example of that.
Okay.
Because there are definitely days when I wake up and I'm just not feeling it. The words aren't flowing. I'd rather be doing anything else. But I've learned that if I just sit down and I commit to writing for a certain amount of time, even if it's just for like 30 minutes,
yeah,
the creative juices eventually start flowing.
It's like you have to prime the pump.
You do. You just have to start.
And that reminds me of something else Thewizardliz talks about that I found really insightful, which is the importance of recognizing disrespect and manipulation. And she admits that she struggled with this for a long time because of her upbringing.
It's such a common experience, especially for people who have been in, unhealthy relationships where their boundaries were consistently crossed.
And it's like what might seem normal to one person can be incredibly disrespectful and damaging to another.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we might not even recognize it as disrespect because it's what we're used to.
Exactly. And she talks about how, she used to get into arguments with people who criticized her because she felt like she had to defend herself.
It's that need to protect our ego and prove them wrong.
But she eventually realized that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone.
Right.
She knew her worth, and she didn't need that external validation.
And that's such a powerful shift.
It is.
It's about reclaiming our power.
And it's about setting those boundaries.
Exactly. It's about saying, you know what? I deserve to be treated with respect, and I'm not going to tolerate anything less than that.
And it's okay to walk away from relationships that violate those boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy.
No, it's not.
Especially if we've been conditioned to, seek approval or put others' needs before our own.
Yeah. But it's so important. And it's so freeing when you finally do it. And that reminds me of another point she makes about the difference between being alone and being lonely. And I think a lot of people get those two things confused.
Oh, for sure. And she actually shares a personal anecdote about this, too. Like, she used to crave connection and friendship, but she was so afraid of being alone that she ended up settling for relationships that weren't good for her.
Right. And I think a lot of people can relate to that
Oh, yeah.
because we're so conditioned to believe that being alone is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But she eventually realized that she was actually happier being alone than she was being surrounded by drama and negativity.
And it's about recognizing that solitude can be a time for reflection and for growth and self-discovery.
It is.
It's an opportunity to really connect with ourselves on a deeper level and to figure out what we want.
What's important to us.
Exactly.
It's like sometimes we need that space
We do.
to just be with ourselves.
And to get clear on who we are and what we want.
Yeah. And it's not about isolating ourselves.
No, not at all.
It's about choosing quality over quantity when it comes to our relationships.
Absolutely.
And being intentional about who we let into our lives.
And you know, it's interesting because research has actually shown that people who are comfortable being alone tend to have stronger social connections overall.
That makes sense.
Because they're more selective about their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well,
They're more likely to cultivate deep, meaningful bonds.
so maybe instead of fearing being alone, we should actually embrace it.
Yeah. It's a gift.
It is a gift to get to know ourselves better.
To recharge, to create, to just be.
I love that. And you know, it all comes back to that point about creating our own reality. We have the power to choose the people we surround ourselves with, to cultivate those relationships that support our growth and our well-being.
It's about creating a life that feels good to us on every level.
And that brings us to another really powerful point that Thewizardliz makes, which is about overcoming hurdles. She says, remind yourself of the hurdles you have overcome in your life already. This is how strong you are. You have dealt with bigger issues before you still got out of it. You still got up and you still continued with your life. I mean, how inspiring is that?
It's so powerful.
It is.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in our current struggles that we forget how far we've come.
Right, we forget about our own resilience.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to take those moments to reflect on those past victories, to remind ourselves of our strength, our capacity for growth.
Because we've all been through stuff, right?
I mean,
and if we could get through that, we can get through anything.
And, you know, the challenges that we face, they shape us. They make us stronger. They make us wiser. They teach us valuable lessons.
So what are some of the hurdles that you've overcome that have made you stronger?
Oh, gosh, so many. But one of the biggest ones I would say is starting my own business, because it was such a huge risk.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were so many moments when I doubted myself. I wanted to give up,
Yeah.
but I persevered, you know, and I'm so grateful that I did because it taught me so much about resilience, about resourcefulness, about the importance of believing in myself even when things are tough.
That's amazing.
It was a crash course in entrepreneurship and in life, really.
It's like those challenges force us to grow.
They do.
And they show us what we're really made of.
Yeah. They reveal our strength.
They do. And that leads us to another really interesting concept that Thewizardliz talks about, which is learning from tests. She shares her belief that, you know, God tests us to see how we've evolved. And she gives examples from her own life where she faced similar challenges repeatedly, but each time she learned something new, she handled the situation differently.
It's like those recurring patterns. They're a way for the universe to be like, hey, did you learn the lesson from last time?
Right.
Are you ready to make a different choice now?
Yeah. It's almost like those challenges keep coming back until we learn the lesson.
They do.
Yeah. So what about you? Have you ever had a test like that?
You know, I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is the importance of setting boundaries. Because I used to be a total people pleaser, always putting others' needs before my own. But it led to so much resentment and burnout. And, you know, I kept finding myself in situations where my boundaries were being crossed until I finally realized, okay, I need to learn to say no. I need to prioritize my own well-being.
Yeah.
And I need to create those healthy boundaries in all of my relationships.
It's a tough lesson to learn.
It is. It is. But it's so transformative. And it's ongoing.
It's a process.
It is.
It's not like you just learn it once and then you're good.
No, it's a constant practice.
Yeah, and it looks different in every relationship.
It does. It requires that awareness, and it requires that willingness to, you know, to really honor ourselves and to communicate our needs clearly.
That's so important because when you think about it, setting boundaries is actually a form of self-love and self-respect.
It is. And it's not selfish.
It's not.
It's essential.
Yeah.
It's about protecting our energy, you know, creating a life that feels good to us.
And it allows us to show up more fully for the people we love.
It does.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy, especially if we've been conditioned to, you know, put others first. But it's so important.
It is. And what's so cool about Liz's message is that she just keeps reinforcing this idea that we have so much more power than we realize.
Absolutely.
And that we can create a life that is truly fulfilling and joyful if we're willing to do the work.
And if we're willing to be honest with ourselves about what we want and what we deserve.
Absolutely.
And then take those aligned actions to make it happen.
I think that's a perfect place to pause for now.
Okay.
We'll pick up this conversation in our next episode.
Sounds good.
And we'll dive even deeper into the Thewizardliz's wisdom.
I'm looking forward to it. It's fascinating, right, how our upbringing can kind of shape our perception of what's acceptable in relationships. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're being mistreated until we start to question those patterns that were ingrained in us from a young age.
It's true. And it takes so much courage to break free from those patterns, especially if we've been surrounded by them our whole lives.
Absolutely. It really does. It's like, you wake up from a dream and you realize that the world doesn't have to be the way that you always perceived it.
Yeah. And Thewizardliz talks about how, she used to think arguing with people who criticized her was just normal, even necessary. She felt like she had to defend herself and prove them wrong.
Yeah, that need to defend ourselves can be so strong, especially when we're feeling, insecure or threatened. It's like our ego is trying to protect us from feeling, hurt or rejected.
Yeah. But eventually, she realized that those arguments were actually draining her energy and preventing her from moving forward.
It's like we get caught in this trap of our own making. We're so focused on proving our point or winning the argument that we lose sight of what truly matters.
And what's so empowering is that she just decided to stop engaging in those battles. She realized that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone.
That's a powerful shift in perspective, for sure.
It is.
It's about recognizing that our worth is inherent.
Yeah.
And it doesn't depend on getting that external validation from other people.
It's about choosing peace over proving a point.
Exactly.
Which can be really hard.
It can be. It can be. Especially when we're triggered or we feel like our ego's on the line.
It's so freeing.
Oh, it is. It is. It frees up so much energy for us to focus on things that actually matter. Our own growth, our well-being,
Yeah. She also makes this really interesting observation about people who are constantly on the go. The ones who are always going out, drinking, watching reality TV, just like overindulging in all these different ways. And she suggests that maybe they're running from something.
Yeah, that's a thought-provoking idea, for sure.
It's like they're afraid to be alone with their own thoughts.
It's like they're using those external distractions to try to numb themselves from, their emotions, or maybe to avoid facing something difficult in their lives.
Yeah, and it can become such a vicious cycle, right?
It can.
Because the more we try to avoid those difficult emotions, the more power they actually have over us.
Absolutely. It's like they just keep building up.
They fester.
They do.
And she actually shares her own experience with this.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
She used to binge eat to try to cope with the trauma that she had experienced.
Food can be very comforting.
It can.
Especially when we're stressed or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's like readily available.
And it's easy.
It is.
But it's a temporary fix.
Absolutely.
It doesn't address those underlying issues.
Right. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a billet wound.
Yeah, it's not going to work long term.
No.
But what's so amazing is that once she started to heal those wounds, she no longer felt the need to numb herself with food.
That's what's so powerful about healing.
It is.
It creates that space for us to develop healthier coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
We don't need to rely on those unhealthy habits anymore.
And it all starts with facing those difficult emotions.
Absolutely.
Instead of trying to run away from them.
Feeling them, processing them.
Yeah, and it can be scary.
It can.
But it's so liberating on the other side.
It really is. It's like we're finally free from those chains that have been holding us back,
And it leads to a much more authentic and fulfilling life.
And speaking of authenticity, one of the things that I love about Thewizardliz is that she's not afraid to be herself.
She really isn't.
Like, she embraces her quirks and her imperfections, and she encourages others to do the same.
Yeah, she's like, be you unapologetically. And I think that's such a powerful message, especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with images of perfection.
Totally.
Yeah.
And you know what? Research has actually shown that people who are more authentic tend to be happier.
Really?
Yeah. They have stronger relationships because they're more likely to attract people who appreciate them for who they are, flaws and all.
That makes sense.
And they're less likely to experience burnout or resentment because they're not trying to be someone they're not.
It's like when you're authentic,
Yeah.
you attract genuine connection.
You do.
And you create a life that feels true to you.
Exactly.
I love that. And, it all comes back to that idea of self-love, which is something that Thewizardliz talks a lot about.
Oh, for sure. She's all about self-love.
She is. And she makes this really great point that self-love isn't just about, bubble baths and face masks. It's about recognizing your worth.
Absolutely.
Setting those boundaries, making choices that are aligned with your values.
It's about honoring ourselves.
Yeah. And it's not always easy.
It's not, especially if we've been conditioned to believe that we're not good enough or that we don't deserve to be happy.
But it's so important.
It's essential for our well-being.
It is. And, when we love and accept ourselves, it creates this ripple effect in all areas of our lives.
Yes.
Our relationships, our work, our health, everything.
Our creativity.
Your energy.
I love that. And I think it's a beautiful reminder that self-love really is the foundation for everything.
It is. It's the key to unlocking our full potential.
And to creating a life that we truly love.
Absolutely.
And it's so refreshing, to hear someone speaking about personal development with such honesty and vulnerability.
It is.
It makes it feel so much more real and relatable.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's inspiring, too, to see how she's used those experiences to create such a positive and empowering message for others.
Totally, yeah. You mentioned earlier that her message is all about empowerment. Yeah, I think that's like the underlying theme that runs through all of her advices. It's like she's constantly reminding us that we have choices, that we have the power to change our thoughts, our behaviors, and ultimately our lives.
Yeah. And she's not saying it's easy.
No.
But she's saying it's possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it starts with that awareness, that recognition that we're not stuck.
Yeah.
That we have agency.
Yeah. It's like she's giving us permission to take ownership of our own happiness.
Yeah.
And to break free from those limiting beliefs that might be holding us back.
It's like she's saying, you are not defined by your past. You're not defined by your circumstances. You have the power to create a new reality for yourself.
And she backs up that message with her own actions.
Oh, yeah, she walks the walk.
She does.
She's a living example of what's possible when we embrace those principles.
Absolutely. So for someone who's just starting out on their personal growth journey, what advice would you give them based on, what we've learned from Thewizardliz?
I would say start by identifying one area where you'd like to see positive change. It doesn't have to be anything huge. It could be improving your physical health, or strengthening your relationships, or developing a more positive mindset. Just choose one thing and focus on that.
Don't try to change everything at once.
No, definitely not. Small steps, one at a time.
And be patient.
Yes, be patient. Change takes time. There's going to be ups and downs.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
But celebrate those small wins along the way, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's amazing how much momentum you can create just by acknowledging your progress.
And don't be afraid to ask for help. There are so many resources available.
Therapy, coaching, support groups, friends, family.
Exactly. It's about building that network of support that can help you stay on track, especially when things get tough. Because they will.
They will.
And most importantly, believe in yourself.
Yes, this is so key.
Believe that you are capable of achieving great things. Because you are.
We all are.
We all have that potential within us.
I love that. So I think, at the end of the day, Thewizardliz's video is such a powerful reminder that we all have the potential to create a life that is fulfilling, joyful, and aligned with our deepest values.
Absolutely.
And that journey starts with a single step.
It does. So if you're feeling inspired,
take that step.
Take that step.
And remember her message, you are not your past.
You are not your circumstances.
You have the power to create the life you want.
And you deserve it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Thewizardliz's wisdom.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.